Thank you for listening. If you want to know more about us and our services, please visit our website at www.wsk9co.com.
Today we're going to talk about fecal matter, and it's kind of a funny topic because how does fecal matter relate to matter?
How does fecal matter matter?
How does fecal matter matter?
Yeah.
To dog training. And it actually is a lot. There's a lot of association, because if your dog is not well, or your dog is not eating well, or your dog got into something, really impacts the training. So when we're working dogs, obviously we have to clean up poop. And that can be a topic in and all of itself, is cleaning up poop. But what are some of the things that we see as we're out and about with working dogs as it relates to poop? Chris, what are some of the things that you've experienced with, maybe associated to the dog that you're walking or working, to maybe how they're acting versus what their poop is?
Sure. It's well, first it's an uncomfortable topic. Right. We don't sit around and just talk about this every day. However, it is something that in our line of work that we look at all the time. Just from the average, grabbing yourself a doggy bag and cleaning up, to having a new dog in the house, it can tell us a lot about what's happening inside your dog. And number one, the first thing that comes to mind is when a new dog is introduced to a new environment. Let's say we take on a board and train. One of the things that we tend to see is diarrhea, and mainly that's due to stress. So when your dog has diarrhea, it's not necessarily just something that they've eaten. It can also be a sign of stress, and you want to pay attention to that. In some of the most, I don't know what you would call it, crazy cases perhaps, is, I even hesitate to talk about it, but one of the owners had said that their dog hasn't, had a bowel movement in quite some time, and they were concerned about it. So as I took the dog out on a walk, it seems the more vigorous that we went, the more the dog would try and go to the bathroom. And finally, as the dog attempted to go to the bathroom, what I saw was a pair of panties coming out of the rear end. Well, the dog was, having a difficult time trying to pass those. So with a little bit of help, we were able to make them pass. And so the long and short of it for me is one of the first signs that I look for in a dog is not necessarily a tail wag, but more what happens out of the back end to tell me what's happening with the dog. Yep.
Shannon, what are some of the things that from the vet clinic side, and then to now on kind of the other side of things, that you're seeing and experiencing with dog poop?
With the dog poop. I think number one, as Chris said, is diarrhea. Especially when I'm walking dogs that are in training with you where you're going multiple times a week or they're staying here. Some dogs that I walk, I never see a normal bowel movement until they're kind of like out of their boot camp, in quotes, training, because it's so much stress on their mind, on their body, When boarding dogs, number one thing I notice is the volume of poop. If you're feeding your dog a diet that their body can't access the nutrition, or it's not formulated properly for their body, they poop and poop and poop and poop and poop so much. Your dog should not be pooping like 6 to 8 times a day.
Right.
So you need to be careful when you're choosing a food, that you're choosing one that's formulated to be bioavailable, so they're not just excreting everything that they're eating without getting nutritional value out of it.
Right.
So those are the main two things I notice with dogs I don't know.
Yeah. The fascinating thing here with dogs that are in the board and train program and the food that comes, I don't always get the bag of food. I get the bucket of food, so I don't know necessarily the brand. I do now because I know what they are. But you can always tell whose poop is what outside based on the food that they're eating. And, for me, I can start... Some dogs I've switched over to a healthier food, and then that's what they go home with, and really educating the client that way. Others, the dog is having a hard time through training, and we have to keep it super simple, so we don't want to change the food on them because it's just more stress to their body. But I feel like, strange of a topic that it is, pooping is kind of one of the first signs for us to tell us who the dog is inside, mentally and physically. And then how the dog is eating tells us, a lot about what their poop is like. But you're right with the amount of poop. People ask all the time, they're pooping a lot, and how much should a dog poop? What's the average? How much should a dog poop?
I would say look at it like yourself, because you're an omnivore and your dog's an omnivore, so your dog should poo as many times as you do.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 times a day.
Yeah.
Not more than 3.
Right. Yeah. And that's pretty much what I expect too. Sometimes I have dogs that poop like 3 times on the walk. And that is a stress poop, or it is a marking poop, not that they have to poop. So there's different communication based on poop. Chris, what's your take on fecal matter?
Well, like I said in the beginning, fecal matter matters.
Yes.
It does, going back, I don't want to repeat myself, but it does tell us a great deal about what's happening inside of the dog, including, whether or not they're ingesting things that they shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're tearing up their beds and they're eating it. Well,
it's coming out.
That doesn't get digested. That also comes out with it.
Right.
And there's been a number of times that I've seen in board and trains where, they've ingested other things like, parts of blankets
from home
and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, and that comes out and we see that. So it's a holistic view on the dogs that come in. It's a holistic view on your dog.
Yeah.
On, like we keep saying over and over, it's not just a walk. We don't just go out for a walk. There's micro corrections that are happening, and it's also a holistic view on your dog's health, which includes dog poo.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I see is you can smell. For me, as the experienced dog person being in the dog world for so long, and Shannon, Chris, you're there too, is we can smell Giardia.
Yes.
Even when there's no diarrhea. There's that smell.
Distinctive.
I can smell parvo before the diarrhea starts. And I think that, from our perspective as trainers, it's responsible for us to know those things and to educate the owners, and also not train or have a lesson if the dog is not feeling well. And I tell that to people. If you've had an exhausting week, training isn't okay. Your dog's not going to absorb it. If your dog has had a tummy ache from something, it's okay to skip the week because training is mentally stressful and it can cause disruption.
In the most extreme cases, and I'll use Mitt as an example, right away that there is something serious happening. And in his case, before we had to let him go, there was a great deal of blood. Yeah. And it was continuous. It wasn't just
a little stress.
A little blood. And no, it was continuous.
Yeah.
And, that really told us right off the bat that, there is something serious happening with Mitt.
Right. Shannon, what's the recommended, do we get, do we get fecals every year? Do we get them every 6 months? Should we be deworming? What's the recommendation there, overall with how here in Utah, how active we are outside and interacting with dogs so much?
For me personally, I think it depends on your situation that you have with your dog. If there are places that if you take them to like a daycare or a boarding facility, they're going to require you to have fecal more often so that you're not spreading disease in their facility.
Yeah.
I do a fecal for my dog every year just because it's part of his annual blood work. Mm-hmm. It's just included in that. But if it wasn't included, I probably wouldn't do it because he doesn't go out and get exposed to things a lot. So if you're going out hiking all the summer, you probably want to have a fecal at the beginning of the season and at the end of the season. Mm-hmm. I think also if you're giving heartworm prevention medication, a lot of that time includes an intestinal parasite prevention. So if your dog is on a prevention like that, then you need to test less often because because you're purging those parasites.
Yeah, yeah. What about fecals? They don't test for Giardia. Is that something that is requested separately, or is it something that should even be tested until you see signs of it?
It depends on your exposure. And if you're an avid hiker, you would probably know the areas where Giardia is more prevalent. And so if your dog is in those areas, your dog can be a carrier of Giardia with not ever showing signs.
Yeah. So
you do want to request to have a separate Giardia test if you are camping and hiking in areas where Giardia is prevalent.
Yeah. And, I've had probably a small amount of dogs, but I'm sure Amy from Kansas sees it more. But there's been some that have been here as puppies that, one was full blown, like could not stop the cycle, and he was a carrier, and it was alive and well. And the other one is a carrier, but he never, he didn't have the diarrhea, he didn't have, that whole piece of it. And so it was, you have a carrier of Giardia, so how does one deal with that, knowing that you're out spreading Giardia?
Right. Well, and you can, even if they're a carrier, you can treat for it, but you have to follow up with the testing more avidly, I guess you would say, because there are phases of the body where they're shedding Giardia and where they're not. And so you can get a false negative result. And so you would just want to follow the recommendation of your veterinarian of how often to test to try and catch it in the cycle when they are shedding it to know for sure whether they're positive or not.
Yeah, yeah. So there's... and that's probably the biggest thing that we see over and over is the Giardia cycle. But, definitely not being afraid to know what a normal poop is. And if it doesn't feel normal from your mental state, looking at it, from picking it up, if it doesn't, you should probably get in and see the vet. But also, sometimes training causes diarrhea. And one of the things that we do here, when we know the dog is healthy, it's kind of one of the things that I tell clients is make sure your dog's healthy, make sure you've got a clean bill of health from your vet. And then I give pumpkin, just regular canned pumpkin, for a series of 48 hours. And if it doesn't clear it up with the pumpkin and that they stay clear, heading into the stress time, then I'm starting to watch for different signs for things. But pumpkin is a good way to say, maybe you just have a little stress and I don't need to rush you into the vet and get on antibiotics, but just need to help your gut get healthy. Chris?
There's one other dog poo related topic that comes to mind, and that is I don't recall the scientific term of it, but it's the dogs that eat poo. That, and we've seen them all. We have seen every variation there is. We've actually owned one that did.
Yep.
For me, that is probably the number one pet peeve for me. It's one of those things I just have to close the curtain and walk away, because it is, boy, that alone just sets me off.
Yeah.
Man alive.
Yeah. And that's another, I mean, if you have a poop eater, you probably should get in and have fecals done more regularly than if you don't. Even if they're eating their own poop, and that they're not exposed to other dogs' poop, it's still, if we could come up with the solution of dog poop eating, we would be millionaires, because there's all these philosophies out there. There's all from nutrition to not letting your dog see you clean up to be extra clean. And I have yet to have anything work other than your dog poops and you clean it up and you don't expose them to other dogs. That is how you prevent poop eating. Have you had any other experience with poop eating and anything working?
We prescribe things for poop eating at the vet all the time, and then people don't usually give feedback. They don't usually call and say, oh, that worked really good. So I honestly don't know if the things that we prescribe for poop eating work. And I have not personally had a dog that has had that. Knock on wood, knock on wood.
Yeah, because it's not fun.
So I don't have very much experience with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard for, it's a hard question. And then you have a poop eater.
It's a difficult topic too.
Yeah.
Depending on the type of personality that you have, like mine, as I said, it's one, boy, that is the pet peeve that just sets me off.
Yeah.
And although we've seen every level of it, and those levels include dogs that will just turn around and eat their own, to dogs that are selective about eating different poo,
right,
to dogs that wait for it.
Yeah. Yeah. They're running and waiting behind every dog that's pooping. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have seen them all. And like you said, is if we had the cure for that, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But there isn't. There just simply isn't.
And you know what's fascinating, in the 23 years, I see it more now than ever before. And I'm not sure if it's our deterioration of poor breeding, to the amount of dogs that we're pulling in from rescues, that it's a form of survival. I don't know, but it definitely is worse now than it ever used to be. And so I think the most important thing to remember about fecal matter is that we pay attention to it, and so should you. And we should understand and know our dog's overall health really can be looked at through poop and how they poop. Shannon, do you have anything more to add out there?
Don't be afraid to go to the vet if you think something's weird.
Yeah.
I always can tell my dog is sick right away, and so they tease me all the time. I bring him in. He needs to be checked out. Oh, how long has your dog been sick, Shannon? For 2 hours?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that he's sick.
Yep.
And so don't be afraid to say, my dog's sick and he needs help,
right, because
something is weird with him, anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if it's nothing, what we see and what we've experienced versus, the average dog owner, we have our old man, Bora, who normally, through his years, he's always stayed in one spot and pooped his pile and moved on. And now the older he's gotten, he's kind of poop dribbling he's just moving when he's pooping. Which is a normal old dog cycle, but it's okay to go in and check for this isn't normal, and hey, your dog's getting old, and now this is, the next step to it. So it definitely, you shouldn't seem, and keep going back until there is a solution to it. And maybe not going back to the vet is the solution. Maybe it's food allergies. Maybe you need to change the food. Maybe they're pooping too much. Maybe the poop is too runny. And that all can be food-based, but you want to work with somebody that knows nutrition, that can help you through that process. You don't just start changing foods day after day because it's not all of a sudden going to be solid. So no matter what, to get your dog's poop normal, don't be afraid to work with and don't be afraid to ask questions about something that's not normal.
Thank you for listening. If you want to know more about us and our services, please visit our website at www.wsk9co.com. And as always, we urge you to get out and train.